The person I hurt was my closest friend, and I hurt her in the specific and deliberate way that only a closest friend can hurt you, with the full knowledge of where the vulnerable places were, and the conscious decision to use that knowledge. And I did it 40 years ago, when I was 36 years old, and I have known for 40 years exactly what I did, and exactly why it was unforgivable, and exactly what it cost her. And I have been not saying that to her face for all of that time. And last spring, when I was 76 years old, I finally said it, and what she said back to me is the reason I am telling you this today. My name is Miriam. I'm 76 years old, and what I want to tell you is not only what happened between Ellen and me, though I will tell you all of it, but what her response showed me about what I had actually been carrying for 40 years, and what the carrying had been doing to me, and to her, and to the space between us that used to be a friendship. I need to start with what I did, because the apology is not meaningful without the full account of the thing it was for, and because I have spent enough years with the managed version of the account to know that the managed version is not the honest one, and that the honest one is the only version worth telling at 76. Ellen and I had been friends since we were 22 years old, which meant that by the time I did what I did, we had been friends for 14 years, long enough for the friendship to have accumulated the specific weight of a relationship that has been through enough of the significant things that it has become load-bearing, one of the structures of a life that holds other things up. We had met in the first year after college, both of us working entry-level jobs in the same city, and both of us in the particular condition of young women who have recently left the organized social world of school and who are finding, in the less organized social world of early adulthood, that genuine friendship requires more active seeking than it did when proximity was providing it automatically. We found each other through a mutual acquaintance and recognized something in each other quickly. The specific recognition of people whose interior landscape is similar enough that the conversation opens immediately and goes deep without the gradual warming up that most friendships require. Ellen was, from the beginning, the more talented one. I want to say that clearly, and without the residual defensiveness that I carried about it for so many years, and that I have only recently, in the territory of the late 70s and the full accounting they have produced, been able to release entirely. She was more talented as a writer, which was the arena that mattered to both of us, because we had both gone into publishing, and the talent was visible and genuine and recognized by everyone around her. And I had known from early in our friendship that the talent was real, and had told her so, and had meant it. And alongside the genuine appreciation of it, I had been carrying, for almost as long, a specific and corrosive form of envy that I had managed very successfully into the invisible, and that had been, underneath the managing, the primary organizing force of what I did to her in 1984. We were both working at the same publishing house by then, had arrived there by different routes, and at different times, and occupied different positions. And Ellen had been working on a manuscript for several years, a novel that was the most serious work she had done, and that she had shared with me across the years of the writing in the specific form that very close friends share work in progress, with the full and vulnerable openness of someone who trusts the reader absolutely, who is showing the unfinished and the imperfect and the most interior alongside the finished and the strong, because the trust is sufficient to hold all of it. I had read every draft. I knew the novel in the intimate way that the person who reads every draft knows it, knew not only the final form, but the process, the decisions and the revisions, and the moments where the writing had broken through to something genuinely new, and the moments where it had not yet found what it was reaching for, and the knowing of it in that form was, I understand now, and did not fully understand then, itself a form of a sacred trust, the trust of an artist who has shown you the work before it is finished, and who has, in the showing, extended a confidence that is not available to everyone, and that carries obligations that I did not honor. There was an editorial position that opened at the house in the spring of 1984, a senior position, the kind of position that both Ellen and I would have wanted, and that Ellen was, by any honest assessment, better positioned to receive, both because her work was stronger and because she had built the relationships within the house that the position required. I wanted it anyway, wanted it with the specific and not entirely rational intensity that the envy I had been managing for years produced when it encountered the concrete form of the thing it had been organized around. And I made the decision to pursue it in a way that was not simply competitive, but that used what I knew about Ellen's work, the knowledge from the years of reading the drafts, in a way that was a betrayal of the trust she had extended in the showing. I will be specific because the specificity is what honesty requires. I spoke to the editor who would make the decision, and I said things about Ellen's novel, the novel I had read in its every draft, that were not the generous account of a friend who wanted her to succeed, but the strategic undermining of a competitor who wanted her to fail, who used the intimate knowledge of the work's process and its imperfections, and the places where it had not yet found what it was reaching for, to cast doubt on the project and on Ellen's readiness for the kind of senior editorial work the position required. I said these things in the specific and careful form that betrayals take when they are conducted by people who understand the importance of plausible deniability, in the form of concerns and observations and questions rather than accusations, in the form that is hardest to identify as the deliberate act it is because it wears the clothing of the collegial sharing of honest professional assessment. I got the position. Ellen did not. She never knew, as far as I was aware for the years that followed, the specific role I had played in the outcome, though she knew the outcome was wrong and felt it as a professional slight that she attributed to the general dynamics of the workplace rather than to the specific actions of her closest friend. She left the house within a year and went to a competitor and built a career that was successful and that produced, eventually, the novel she had been writing, published not at our house but elsewhere, reviewed well, read by the people it was written for, enduring in the way that good work endures. The career she built was not diminished by what I had done to her in 1984 in any ultimate sense. And I want to say clearly that the lack of ultimate diminishment does not alter the wrong or reduce it to something less than what it was. What I had done to the friendship was ended, though the ending was not immediate and was not named. Ellen and I continued to see each other across the years after 1984, continued the form of the friendship, while the substance of it had been removed by what I had done. And the continuation without the substance is a specific and strange thing that I have tried to understand across many years. The way two people can go on meeting and talking and presenting the appearance of the relationship they used to have long after the thing that made it real has been destroyed. I believe Ellen felt the change without knowing its source. I know that I felt it, felt the specific and daily discomfort of being in the presence of someone you have wronged, while the wronging is invisible to them. The performance of the friendship, while the friendship is absent, and the performance is its own form of the ongoing harm, its own continued imposition on the person who believes they are in the real thing, while only receiving the imitation. We drifted apart through the late 80s and 90s, which was easy to explain as the natural divergence of two lives that had been parallel and had taken different directions, different houses in different cities, and the natural attrition of distance and time, and I allowed the drifting to be the explanation without examining what was underneath it, which was my own relief at the reduced proximity to the performance of the friendship I had destroyed, the relief of someone who is escaping the daily evidence of their own wrongdoing. By the time I was in my 50s, we are in the category of people who are friends in the historical sense, who have a shared past, and who acknowledge each other warmly when the paths cross, and who do not seek the crossing of them. And I had managed what I had done in 1984 into the form it lived in for the next 30 years, which was not exactly buried and not exactly present, which was the specific and intermediate condition of something that has been thoroughly managed but never resolved. That has been given the form that allows daily life to continue without its intrusion, but that has not been addressed at the level that would allow it to actually close. My husband died in 2019. His name was Robert, and we had been married for 41 years, and his death produced in me, as I understand it now and did not fully understand at the time, a restructuring of the interior that the management of 40 years had organized around his presence, a restructuring that made things audible that the management had been keeping quiet. Ellen became audible again in the way she had been audible before the management, before the distance, before the 30 years of allowing the drift to explain what the drift was not actually the explanation for. She became the specific and unresolved thing that grief tends to surface when it restructures the interior, the thing that has been in the managed condition and that the grief makes unmissable. I did not act on it immediately. I want to be honest about the timeline because the timeline is itself part of the account, part of the honest description of how long the protection holds, even when the thing being protected is clearly, finally, no longer serving anyone. I sat with the audibility for almost 3 years, sat with it in the specific way I had been sitting with the unresolved thing for 30 years. And the sitting was familiar enough to be comfortable, and the comfort was the problem. The way the familiar management makes the continued not addressing feel like simply the state of things. What moved me out of the sitting was something small and specific, which is often the way that the small particular thing is more effective than the large and general reason that the situation has been providing for years without producing action. I read something Ellen had written in 2022, an essay in a magazine, a piece about friendship and about what friendship requires across the long distances of a life. And the essay was written with the honesty and the precision that had always been her characteristic quality, the quality I had recognized from the beginning, and that the envy had been organized around. And reading it, I understood, for the first time and with a clarity that the 30 years of management had not produced, that the specific quality I had envied was the quality I had spent 30 years without in my own life, had spent 30 years producing the managed version of everything in the place where the genuine quality could have been if I had not made the choice I made in 1984, and that the loss was mine in a way and at a depth that I had not previously allowed myself to understand. I found her through the essay's contributor note, which led to a professional website, which provided a contact form, and I sat in front of the contact form for 2 weeks before I typed the first version of what I wanted to say and deleted it and started again, a process that repeated itself across the 2 weeks until I had arrived at something that was honest rather than managed, that said the thing directly rather than in the form of concerns and observations and questions that had been the vocabulary of the original betrayal, and that I was not willing to use again. The message I sent was short, not because brevity was sufficient for what it was addressing, but because the elaboration I kept producing in the longer versions was consistently converting the acknowledgement into an account of my own suffering over what I had done. And my suffering over what I had done was not what the message was about, and was not what I owed her. What I owed her was the direct statement of what I had done, and that I had known it was wrong, and that I was sorry in the specific and unqualified form that does not make its sorriness conditional on the receipt of forgiveness or the provision of absolution. I sent that, and I waited, and I was not certain she would respond, and I understood the uncertainty as appropriate, and as not the thing that would determine whether the message had been worth sending. She responded in 4 days. The response was brief, briefer than my message, and said that she had received it and that she would like to talk, and gave me her number, and the brevity of the response told me nothing about how the conversation was going to go, and I was glad of the not knowing, or not glad exactly, but honest with myself that the not knowing was the appropriate condition to be in, and that the wanting to know in advance was still the protection, still the attempt to secure the outcome before the exposure. And I had been in the protection for 38 years, and the protection had cost enough. I called her on a Tuesday evening in November of last year. She answered on the 3rd ring, and I said her name, and she said mine, and then she said it had been a long time, and I said it had. And then I said what I had come to say, said it in the form I had arrived at across the weeks of writing and deleting and starting again, said what I had done in 1984, and that I had known it was wrong, and that the knowledge had been with me across every year since, and that I was sorry in the direct and unelaborated form. And then I stopped and let the silence be what it was. She was quiet for long enough that I began to understand the silence as its own response, as the considered response of someone who is deciding not quickly but carefully. And what she said when she spoke was not what I had prepared myself for in any of the forms I had prepared for, which were the anger and the hurt and the extended account of what the betrayal had cost her, and possibly the forgiveness if the call went well, and the formal ending of any possibility of reconnection if it did not. She said, I knew. Not right away, but within a few months I knew. And then she was quiet again. The knowing. The same knowing that Curtis had carried about Gerald. The same legibility of the wrong to the person who received it. The knowledge that had never been confirmed by the person who held the other half of it. She had known for 38 years what I had done, and had been carrying the knowledge in the unconfirmed form, in the form that has no external validation, and that can be doubted because it exists only on one side, and the other side has never acknowledged it. I asked her, after a moment, what the knowing had been like to carry. It was not a question I had prepared, and I am not entirely sure why I asked it in that form, but the form felt right, felt like the question that the conversation needed, rather than the question that my own account of the situation would have produced if I had stayed inside my account of it. She was quiet again, and then she said, more slowly, and with the quality of someone arriving at words for something that has not previously had words, that the knowing without the confirmation had produced in her a specific and persistent uncertainty, not about what had happened. She was clear about what had happened, but about her own judgment, about whether the clarity she had was reliable, or whether it was the distortion of someone who had been disappointed professionally and was looking for an explanation that located the fault outside herself. I want to stay with this for a moment, because it is the thing she said that I have thought about most in the months since the call, and that has changed my understanding of what the 38 years of not confirming had actually done to her, which is not what I imagined it had done when I imagined it at all, which I did not do as often or as honestly as I should have. I had understood the harm I had done to Ellen in 1984 as the professional harm, the position not received, the specific blow to a career at a significant moment in its trajectory, and I had understood the harm of the subsequent years as the harm of the friendship lost, the genuine and close friendship ended by the betrayal that destroyed its foundation. What I had not understood, had not allowed myself to understand across 38 years of carrying the knowledge of the wrong from inside my own account of it, was the specific and ongoing harm of the unconfirmed knowledge, the way that the carrying of a truth that has never been externally validated produces, over years and decades, a subtle but real erosion of confidence in the reliability of one's own perception, the particular cost of being the sole carrier of a knowledge that could be confirmed by someone who has chosen for 38 years to not confirm it. She had been doubting herself. That is what she was telling me, in the careful and slowly arrived at words of someone who has not previously had occasion to say this out loud. Not constantly, not in a debilitating way, but with the intermittent quality of unresolved things. The way a question that has not been answered returns with the persistence of something that the interior knows is still open. Had she misread the situation? Had the professional disappointment distorted her perception? Had the person she trusted most in the world actually done the things she believed that person had done? Or had the believing itself been the distortion of someone who needed an explanation for an outcome she could not accept? One had been, for 38 years, the person who could have ended that doubt, and had not, and the not ending was not passive, but active in the specific sense that every day of the not confirming was a day in which the doubt was allowed to continue, in which the wrong was continued in the form of the withheld confirmation that would have made her knowledge of it real rather than suspected. I had understood my silence as the protection of myself from the exposure of the acknowledgement, and it was that, and it was simultaneously, in a way I had not previously understood with full clarity, the continuation of the harm in the form of the ongoing isolation of the person who had received it, inside the unconfirmed knowledge of having received it. We talked for almost 2 hours. Not all of it was about 1984, and not all of it was difficult. And I want to say that because the account of the conversation, as only the accounting of the wrong and its costs, would not be the honest account of what the 2 hours actually were, which were also, in their second half especially, the conversation of two women in their mid-70s who had known each other since they were 22 and who were in the specific and improbable space opened by the saying of the thing that had not been said for 38 years, something closer to the two people they had been before the wrong than they had been in all the years since. She told me about her life, and I told her about mine, and the telling had the quality of two people catching up across a long distance that is more than temporal, across the distance that the wrong and the not saying and the drift had produced, and that the call was, in some partial and incomplete way, beginning to close. I say partial and incomplete deliberately because I am not interested in the version of this story that resolves into the full restoration of the thing that was lost, because the full restoration is not what happened and is not what is available to two women in their mid-70s who have lived 38 years on the other side of a significant betrayal. What is available is something more modest and more honest than that, which is the relationship that is possible when the thing that was not said has finally been said. And the relationship that is possible in those conditions is different from what existed before and is also real. And the reality of it is not diminished by the incompleteness of the restoration. Near the end of the call, she said something that I have held alongside everything else from that evening as the thing I most needed to hear, and most would not have predicted she would say. She said that she was glad I had called, not because the calling resolved the harm, or closed the account, or gave her back the year she had lost, or the position she had not received, or the years of the friendship that had been the performance rather than the real thing, none of which the call could return. She was glad I had called because the calling had given her the confirmation, had made her knowledge real rather than suspected, had ended the intermittent doubt about the reliability of her own perception that had been the quiet, ongoing cost of the unconfirmed knowledge, and that the ending of that specific doubt was something she had not known she had been waiting for, and that turned out, in the receiving of it, to matter more than she had anticipated. I want to sit with that because it is the most important thing I took from the conversation, and the thing that has most changed my understanding of what I was carrying across 38 years, and what the carrying was doing, not only to me, but to her. I had understood the unconfirmed wrong as something that lived primarily in me, in my interior, as the unresolved thing that was mine to carry, because I was the one who had done it, the one who possessed the full knowledge of it and the corresponding full responsibility for it. I had not understood with any clarity that the unconfirmed wrong lived also in her, in a different form, the form of the known but unvalidated, and that the form it lived in her was not the same cost as the form it lived in me, but was a cost that was real, and that had been incurring for 38 years, and that the cost in her was in some respects more insidious than the cost in me, because it had been producing, quietly and without my participation or my awareness, the erosion of her confidence in her own perception. And the erosion of a person's confidence in their own perception is not a minor cost, and is not one that the person carrying the knowledge of the wrong can dismiss as the other person's problem, because the eroding was produced by my silence, and was maintained by my silence, and would have continued to be maintained by my silence if I had continued the protection. I did not forgive myself after the call. I want to say that clearly, because I think the narrative of the late apology sometimes produces the implication that the apology, made with sufficient honesty and received with sufficient grace, generates the closure that it might be tempting to call forgiveness, the sense that the account has been examined and found to have been sufficiently addressed and can now be set aside. That is not my experience of the months since November. What I have instead is something more like the honest possession of the full account, the account that includes what I did, and that I did it, knowing it was wrong, and the 38 years of not saying, and what the not saying cost, both of us, and what the saying finally produced. And the full account is not comfortable, but it is mine, and it is accurate, and the accuracy of it is, at 76, more valuable to me than the comfort of the managed version that I carried for 38 years. Ellen and I have spoken twice since November, not with the frequency or the depth of the friendship we had at 22, and not with any illusion that the 38 years can be simply skipped over in the direction of the connection that preceded them. With the specific and tentative quality of two people who are finding out what is possible in the territory that the saying of the unsaid has opened, and what is possible is not yet fully known, and I am not trying to determine it in advance of the finding out, which is itself a different way of being in a relationship than the way I was in most of my relationships for most of my life, the way that insists on knowing the outcome before the exposure. I want to say something now directly to you, and I want to say it as honestly and as practically as I can, because I think the honest and practical version is the only version worth the saying at this stage of my life, and the only version that is actually useful to someone who is sitting with their own version of the unconfirmed wrong, their own version of the knowledge that has been carried for years or decades without being said to the person who deserves to hear it. The carrying is not neutral. I want to start there because I think the carrying is often understood as a form of the accounting, as evidence of the genuine remorse that the wrong produced, and it is that, but it is also, simultaneously, and in a way that is not always visible from inside the carrying, a form of the continued harm, a continuation of the wrong in the specific form of the withheld confirmation that the person who received the harm is waiting for, consciously or not, to make their knowledge of having received it real rather than doubted. Every year of the carrying without the saying is a year in which the person you wronged is the sole carrier of their own knowledge of having been wronged, and the soul carrying is its own cost, and it is yours to have been imposing it, and it is yours to stop. The saying is hard. I am not pretending the saying is not hard, because the saying requires the full exposure of the thing that the carrying has been protecting you from, requires the standing without the management in front of the person you wronged, and the offering of the acknowledgement without the guarantee of what you will receive in return, and the offering without the guarantee is the exposure, and the exposure is what the carrying has been for. But the hardness of the saying is not a reason not to say it. The hardness is proportional to the weight of the thing and the length of the carrying, and the weight and the length are themselves the reasons to say it rather than the reasons to continue not saying it, because the weight and the length are the measure of what the not saying has been costing and what the saying would cost by comparison. And the comparison, made honestly, is not even close. Ellen said she was glad I called, not because it gave her back what was lost. It did not, and nothing will, but because it gave her the confirmation that ended the doubt, and the ending of the doubt was worth something she had not known to ask for, but that turned out to matter more than she had anticipated. I believe that is true of most of the things that genuine acknowledgement gives to the people who have been waiting for it, that they matter more than anticipated, that the person who has been carrying the unconfirmed knowledge has not always fully understood what the confirmation would mean to them until they receive it, and that the receiving of it after a long wait is not lesser than the receiving of it earlier would have been, is in some respects more significant, more felt, more clearly understood as the specific thing it is. Make the acknowledgement, not for the forgiveness, which is not yours to require and may not be available, and is not the point, for the confirmation, for the ending of the doubt that the unconfirmed wrong has been producing in the person who received it, for the stopping of the continued harm that the not saying has been conducting on your behalf, quietly and consistently, in the years since the wrong was done. For the full account, the honest one, the one that is harder and more accurate and more genuinely yours than the managed version that the carrying produces. I am 76 years old, and I said the thing in November of last year, and Ellen said she was glad I called, and I believe her, and I will not pretend that believing is uncomplicated, or that the full account is comfortable to carry in its honest form. But I am carrying the honest form, and the honest form is mine, and the mineness of it is what the managed version could never give me across 38 years of carrying the other kind. Say the thing. Say it while both of you are still here to say it and to hear it. The window is not unlimited, and the thing does not become lighter in the not saying, and the person on the other end of the confirmation has been waiting, in some form and at some level, since the day the wrong was done. Say it now, from wherever you are, in whatever form the honesty requires, without the management and without the guarantee of what you will receive in return. That is what I know at 76 that I did not know how to do at 36. And the knowing is worth the 38 years it took to arrive at it, and it is available to you right now today, before the window closes. I hope you use it.